any disclosure of pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Okay. I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington confirm the agenda for its meeting held August 22nd, 2019. Mover, Councillor Dunsmore. Second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that is carried. So we have one item on the agenda today. Well, several items, but it's all related to one project. And the first person I will call to come forward is Brian Blackmere from Pearle Hospitality. We're going to be talking about the Southside development today. And he's going to come and do a presentation. And then I'm going to allow for delegations. We have 3 delegations. And after the delegations, we'll allow the staff reports in each of the different sections. Okay? Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. That's better. Does this work, Lisa?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present to Council this morning. We really do appreciate it. For those councillors that I have not met as yet, I would like to let you know my name is Brian Blackmere. I'm Planner Project Manager for Pearle Hospitality. Been working on the Southside lands and the Elora Mill property. I guess going on about 8 years now when it landed on my desk in mid-2011, and we're looking with great anticipation to getting on with the Southside improvements. With me today is Aaron Gianconi, President of Pearle, my colleague and planner Mackenzie Meek, and Tracy Seedhouse from RHC, Robinson Heritage Consultants, who did the Heritage Impact Assessment for the condominium. They'll be available for questions if there are any at that point. I'd like to congratulate those members who have attended the AMO recently. I understand it was very productive and enlightening for you folks. You also had a presentation, as I recall, and Andy was saying it went quite well. You didn't have near as much fun as we did at Riverfest. It was a really good event, except for that torrential rain at about mid-afternoon on Sunday. But shout out to the organizers, the fellows who organized that, Spencer and John Ralston. They do a tremendous job. It was encouraging, too, to see the number of people in the downtown of the village. It was just inundated with folks in the shops. One of the things that struck me when I was putting this presentation together was that we haven't done this in quite some time. I'm going to suggest that it would probably be a wise idea for us to get in front of council, maybe semi-annually, to update people on what is going on the South Side, because some people are left with the impression that things are happening all of a sudden, and that's really not the case. There's nothing in this process that happens all of a sudden. So if council is willing for us to come in for 15 or 20 minutes, is probably all it would take twice a year, just to keep everybody on the same page. Our agenda objectives today, you're right, there's the one project on the table. However, there are several things that we're looking to achieve today. One is the council approval of the Heritage Impact Assessment. That has already been reviewed and approved unanimously by Heritage Centre Wellington. In tandem with that, we're looking for council approval to remove the holding zone on the condominium site. The approval of the HIA is a prerequisite to that holding zone being removed. We're looking for approval of the site plan control bylaw for the property. That bylaw contains various elements related to the built form of the condominium that the Heritage Committee would like to see and ensure are implemented in the final site plans. We're also looking for council approval of the proposed access easements for public. These are easements that would run from the terminus of the McDonald Bridge and run to Carleton to give people access from the bridge terminus to Carleton. We also have easements internal to our site, which will guarantee public access to the community trail. And we'll talk a little bit about the ESA, the environmentally sensitive forested area to the west end of our site. In terms of the public access easements, we are also requesting that council consider that our parkland dedication requirement for the entire site be satisfied once these easements are in place. The calculation is essentially 24% of our land holding is being allocated for public use. far exceeding the Planning Act requirements. So what I would like to do, and there is a bit of a series of graphics, especially for the newer councillors, I'm going to give you a bit of a synopsis of where we've been since 2011. Major planning approvals were put in place in 2012 and 13. That's quite some time has elapsed since that happened. So I'll give you an idea of where we've been, where we're going, where we are currently, and where we're going with the project. So let's see if we can get something to.
Oh, there you go. Did you go backwards or forwards?
I don't know.
That's back.
Yeah, no, that's great. So there's no cursor here, so I'm going to try and just describe. This is the concept plan that was advanced in support of the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments, which were presented to the public in fall of 2012 and ultimately approved in 2013. So this concept plan was produced for a couple of reasons. It was to really allocate where the land uses would occur. It wasn't a building design exercise at all. So the plan and the idea that was implemented was that we would take the residential to the west end of the site, butting up against the environmentally sensitive area, which would remain green space in perpetuity. And then the hotel would be situated next to the residential, offering a bit of a transition into the retail uses that would occur further to the east. And that is pretty much the purpose of that plan. However, you can see that I've outlined in dark, in black, the location of the Potter Foundry building, the ruin that's on site. The original intention with this concept was that the Potter Foundry would be incorporated within the built form of the residential. And it was kind of intended to function as the lobby, if you will, of the condominium. What we discovered was that that wasn't a very practical solution. We have got to excavate some considerable rock in that area to create underground parking for the condominiums. And if that were in fact to happen, the condominium or the Potter Foundry would have been taken out of the public realm entirely. It would become the property ultimately of the condo association and run by the condo board, which really didn't guarantee its integrity going forward. So a second concept was developed. This is the plan we've been looking at since 2013. We changed the configuration of the building to a U shape so that there was a courtyard introduced in the middle of it. It offered a couple of things. It offered better views for those residents in the building, and it broke up the building massing along the trail. And you can see now that the hotel is more articulated with a pool. It's going to be a shared use facility between the hotel and the condominium. And then the pedestrian space, that's the pink area running down the middle of that eastern portion of the site, is a pedestrian promenade that will be fronted by retail on the ground floor and office or banqueting space above. The Walser building, which is the other ruin right across from the LFL admin building, now fully restored, will be fully restored as a part of a future phase. And you'll see the activity center on the south side of Wellington 7. That is going to be firstly a construction staging area for the condominium work, but ultimately function as an activity center administering winter activities on the GRCA land, and that land is what we butt right up against on the south side. So that land is part or right up abutting the Conservation Authority's land. We've been in talks with GRCA about extending those uses, things like snowmobiling, or not snowmobiling, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, possibly dog sledding, just to create that enticement for people to come out here and visit in the winter. It's going to be a fantastic facility. There's going to be a lot of future talks with GRCA about how that happens, but they are amenable to at least talking about it. So the site plan that you just saw, this is an aerial oblique of that layout, And you've got, on the far end, you can see the residential, the U-shaped building with the townhouses running around the perimeter. We always wanted the townhouse owners to be able to walk right down to the community trail, and obviously wanted people using the community trail to firstly see the townhouse elements. They are 2 stories, and then the 5-story condominium is tucked in behind that. This particular building isn't stepped back as much as the current concept shows, but it does show the intent. Likewise with the hotel use, the banqueting use, the restored Walser building, the LFL building. The advent of that McDonald Bridge being in place really allows us to focus on the programming of that space that you see at the terminus, the kind of semicircles that are there. We've always viewed that as being a wonderful opportunity for programming for the public, as will the bridge itself. So this is the landscape plan associated with the condo. The purple rectangle that you can see off to my left is the relocated Potter Foundry. And I'll get into a bit of an explanation as to how that came about. The big point there is that it was suggested that we try to get GRCA and MNR to allow us to put that into the ESA, and into an environmentally protected area. And I didn't hold out a lot of hope for that initially, but what would it be if you didn't try? So I managed to get GRCA planner and arborist out with our environmental people, and we did an assessment all the way from the river up to Wellington 7, looking for essentially 2 things. We were looking for an area that provided a grade difference, very similar to what the building is sitting on now. It slopes towards the river. And secondly, an area that would have the least environmental impact on the ESA. So those were our 2 objectives. From a heritage viewpoint, the objective was to keep that building as close to the current location as we possibly could. And this is where we ended up. We were about 70 meters away from where it currently is. But we have a very similar grade, so it can be constructed or reconstructed in the same fashion as it is now, without losing any of the existing heritage attributes of the building. This shows the towers. I'll call them towers. It's the 5-story component of the building in relation to the existing Elora mill buildings on the north side of the river. This also shows the trail system and the ESA. We've got some considerable buffering, mostly in the form of tree plantings, between the existing 3 residences on Wellington 7 and the building. Here's another one that shows the community trail. So from Wellington 7, this is already existing because it was constructed as part of the hydro plant work. You can see the trail coming down the west side of the condominium and swinging around and paralleling the river. The grade there has been pretty much set right to the end of the condominium building. That land there for public use constitutes about 10% of the condominium site itself. The dark line that you see is the limit of the ESA, so you can see that it runs right along the edge. And I think ghosted in there, you can probably see the relocated Potter Foundry as well. So here is the existing location of the foundry, the relocated location, the area that would have to be cleared of trees to allow the reconstruction to occur. And the extent of green that you see there is the naturalization area. So we're going to be removing trees on the south side of that building in a fairly major way. We're going to be very careful with the species that get replanted there, that they won't occlude views of the Potter Foundry, because we very much want people to see that from Wellington 7. Conversely, the trail system that's interior to the forested area in this particular location runs right to the west side of the Potter Foundry, giving us the opportunity to actually bring people through the building and back out to the community trail. That particular passage through the building, once again, offered interpretive opportunities for the building itself and for the entire industrial heritage on the south side of the river. So there's a tremendous opportunity there. This is our laser pickup of the existing ruin. This will be used by the Tacoma, our engineers, who will be in charge of reconstruction of the building. Obviously, we're going to have to meet some building code requirements in the reconstruction. It will be left as a ruin, but it's got to be made safe for the public. We're going to be bringing them through the building. So between our engineer and your CBO, we'll be able to figure that out. This will also form the basis for as-constructed drawings for the foundry. There's some elevations of the condominium. The top one is from Wellington 7. That's the 5-story component, and that is very critical because back in 2013, when the zoning bylaw, the site-specific zoning bylaw for this site was passed by this council, the parameters were set out for setbacks, typical zoning, setbacks, amenity area provision, parking, and notably height. Height, and as described in that bylaw, is 18 meters from the Wellington Road side of the building. 18 meters is 60 feet. So that was established as the height. The residual, as we come down the slope, was going to come down to the trail, and it is sensibly is the height of the townhouse units. So we've got 5-story towers and 2-story townhouses. So that's why you've got that 7-story on the riverside and 5 where it needs to be described by and where to comply with the zoning bylaw. That's where we need to be on the Wellington Road side. The building is submitted is actually a little bit less than 18 meters. I don't think anybody with naked eye is going to see a difference of 2 feet. So we're just saying that we comply with the bylaw. And in order to give the Heritage Committee everything that they needed to deliberate on the elements of this building, we essentially had to go through a whole site plan approval submission. We had to develop full building plans for the site. So we wouldn't typically be this far along, but heritage requirements really did compel us to produce plans like this. The lower elevation shows the townhouses. The building has been stepped back 3 times from the river. Each step back is about 2.5 meters in depth. You can also see in each case with the Potter Foundry ghosted in. So it gives you a relationship between the condominium as proposed and the relocated Potter Foundry. The architect produced this one to show the relationship between the condominium and the Elora mill on the north side. The land on the south side of the river is higher than on the north in any case, but this shows the Potter Foundry, it shows the condominium building and the height of the Elora mill. There's a couple of renderings, one from Wellington Road 7. Shows the 5-story component of the building. I don't know why there's a dead tree in the middle of it, but the renderers must have felt that was appropriate somehow. The lower image is, in fact, from the McDonald Bridge looking back downriver towards the condominiums with the added context of the hotel and banqueting space added in moving east. It's not my favorite rendering because I don't think anybody's going to be hovering over the Grand River at that point. But once again, shows the relationship between the condominium and the Elora mill. You can see the powerhouse in there as well for the hydro plant. This, to me, is more representative because what the pedestrian will see on the trail system is primarily the 2-story townhouses. And that was the intent. So with the stepping back of the building and the intervening courtyard open space area really breaks up the presentation of that building to the river. And the color palettes are going to be very similar to what you see on West Mill Street. with the completed Elora Mill buildings as well. Same kind of street furniture, lighting, windows, all the punch windows. And there's another example of the kind of implementation that we intend to pursue. Here's the trail system. This really reflects the access easements that are going to be given. That's going to be a consideration for this council today. And then the ESA area, you can see our trail running right through the environmentally sensitive area. We've had some success, and I don't know whether council's aware of this. We had a bat colony in the LFL admin building when we started rebuilding that. Turned out to be an endangered species, so we had M&R rapidly involved in the project, and we managed over the course of the restoration of that building to maintain the habitat for the bat colony, about 300 specimens, and they winter outside of the building. So they when they flew the coop, as it were, and lodged themselves into the side of the gorge for winter. That was our opportunity to reconstruct that building, and we had to have that construction done by about mid-April in times for the bat colony to come back. We had a survey done after they got back, and we got pretty much all 300 back. So we've got a success story there. The forest and the gorge is natural habitat for this little brown myotis bat, and we will be putting bat houses on the outside of the Potter rebuild to encourage the propagation of that species. So I hope that gives you a better idea of what we've been doing, what we've been going through over the past few years. I think the one point that I would really like to make sure is understood is that the condominium building as presented is in compliance with your zoning bylaw and the site-specific zoning put on the site back in 2013. So I hope that helps with your deliberations. I'd be pleased to take any questions.
Thanks, Brian. What we'll do is we'll do the delegations, then we'll have staff reports, and then after all that's done, we're going to open it up to questions. And I know we have people here and people in the gallery who can also answer questions as well. So we'll hold the questions until that point.
Very good.
Appreciate your presentation, Brian.
Thank you.
Do you see Fred?
Sorry? I haven't seen Fred.
Okay, so we have 3 delegations, but I only see 2 here today. So we're going to call on Ian Rankine to come and do his delegation. So just a reminder that 10 minutes, right? Yep. 10 minutes per presenter. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Daniel Bratton for family reasons. He's unable to deliver his remarks. On July 22nd, 2018, I, Daniel Bratton, made the following formal request to Kerry O'Kane. Herein is my citizen request to designate the Elora Kiddie Car ruins as a significant built heritage resource located within the Elora heritage area. The Kiddie Car ruins meet all 3 Ontario Regulation 906 criteria for designation, and any decision to demolish this significant built heritage resource is premature, requiring that Heritage Centre Wellington evaluate this heritage property against the criteria. The official plan mandates the conservation of the Elora heritage area. Pearle Landmark's final site plan must be demonstrated to be consistent with the official plan. There was significant public input into the 203-205 official plan, and it is long past the OP review stage every 5 years, which should have occurred in 2010. The township official plan is not compliant with current provincial heritage conservation policy. I therefore request as a citizen of Centre Wellington Township that the Kiddie Car ruins be designated as a significant built heritage resource. He continues, HCW intended to designate all the ruins on the south side of the Grand River in 2014-15, but was apparently talked out of such action at a meeting with Landmark Pearle and a member of Township Center Wellington senior staff. This Kiddie Car stone structure was originally to be integrated into the Pearle concept, as is referenced in the following article from the Wellington Advertiser, entitled "Development Could Reshape Southside of the Grand River in Village of Elora." This stone building complies with the concept created by the Robinson Report. Save the stone buildings and sacrifice the pre-Confederation wood structures. This was used to justify the demolition of Ross Street. Consistency with the Robinson HIA requires the Heritage Center Wellington evaluate before recommending demolition. I have viewed at the township the current site plans, May 2018. For the Elora Mill condominiums. They do not include the Kiddie Car factory. Indeed, one rendering actually indicates the removal of the old stone ruins. In response to the implications of Landmark Pearle's current site plan, I hereby request as a citizen of Center Wellington the designation of the Kiddie Car ruins. Dr. Bratton received the following reply from Carrie. Good morning, Dr. Bratton. Through staff, this request will be brought forward to the future meeting of Heritage Center Wellington. I noticed Mariana Iglesias, senior planner, was copied on your original email, so she is aware of the request. Subsequently, Daniel received a message from Lisa Miller, dated August 9, 2018. Please be advised that the Heritage Center Wellington considered your request to designate the Elora Kiddie Car ruins at their meeting of August 7, 2018. The committee decided to defer the request to be considered at the same time as the Heritage Impact Assessment is submitted for the property and the surrounding area. That was all I heard until it was brought to my attention that the agenda of Heritage Center Wellington August 6, 2019 meeting included action items 5.2 entitled Elora South Pearle Condominiums and Potter Foundry Heritage Impact Study, which included the Robinson Report's recommendation to move the Pottery Foundry to a new site. In other words, for over a year I had been put on hold while machinations were going on behind closed doors. Now there was no serious objections from HCW about the plan, just questions about the stones would be reconstructed and how the Kiddie Car factory would fit the new terrain. In effect, I had been blindsided by my request to designate these ruins in situ. This betrayal of trust also included a message I had from Brett Salmon in response to a letter in which I questioned the proposed growth management plan, height of the building for the entrance to Elora. Here is a specific relevant quote from the letter written by Mr. Salmon, dated 2/18/04/04. I would note that the paragraph in the report, page 35, referencing the community node in Elora, Salem, does not specifically mention building height. Perhaps it just needs to be clarified that the discussion of 4 to 6 stories is specific to the 2 community nodes that are on Highway 6 in Fergus. Daniel concludes, why is it that Center Wellington Township constantly reneges on its stated promises the minute Landmark Pearle changes its plans? Such changes have included alteration of the original site plan in which the Potter Foundry remained in situ. The argument that it had to be moved because of complications with the condo association is a clear ruse, as Landmark Pearle should have anticipated this issue from the beginning, as well as the issue of the number of stories for the condominium. Why is Landmark Pearle allowed to ride slipshod over official plan growth management study and other policies? If council bullies ahead with the Pearle Landmark plan to move the Potter Foundry and increase the number of stories to 7 without public consultation. Even though this will be the largest project in the history of the village of Elora, I will have no choice but to appeal this decision to the Ontario Integrity Commission, since the township has not observed due process and has not followed policies and procedures under the Ontario Heritage Act and has also violated its official plan. Respectfully submitted, Daniel Bratton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Second delegation that we have is from Bob Cameron. Welcome, Bob.
Good morning, everyone. I thought it was important to be here to show my personal support, but I feel much broader across the community the support of this development. Just as a bit of background, we own two businesses. One is Heritage River Retirement Residence, and the other is a hotel in Guelph called Delta Guelph. And I only say that because I moved back after being away from Centre Wellington in 2002, being away for 28 years. And my passion was to do something on the south side of these lands. I wanted to give back to our community. I wanted to invest in it. And at that time, I approached Al Marquito, who owned Little Folks. And Al and I had a deal. And we had an agreement to buy Little Folks property on the south side of the river. And we spent a considerable amount of money on architect's plans and everything else, and met with Brett and senior staff at the time. And we didn't get to where we'd like to. I would tell you that I was very frustrated. That's why I left and built the hotel in Guelph and Heritage River. And my passion was gone for that site. And I was very frustrated with current council, the council at that time. But I was naive. And I later found out that one of the things that, the reason that council couldn't cooperate with me and put together a partnership to develop the south side was because there was no community improvement plan. And I applaud this council for moving forward with an incredible community improvement plan that allows you to do great partnerships with people who are willing to invest. And in hindsight, I have to say, I'm glad we weren't the ones developing the south side. And I'm glad that it's Pearle that's developing it. And I've got a lot of reasons why I'm glad. One is we wouldn't have owned the mill. And we would never have invested the kind of dollars and the quality that they have in the Elora mill. And it's such an integral part of the south side. So I'm proud to say that I played a small role in bringing Aaron and his family together with Mr. Marquito to broker the deal, because I knew that they needed parking on the south side. And I knew that the views from the mill across, that it was better if it was a whole encompassing development in a community. And I'm proud to say that what I see now, today, in the plans is an amazing development that we could never have pulled off. And I think it's an amazing development for about 8 or 10 reasons, and I'll just give you a couple of them in quickly. One, the public access. When I was a kid, the first thing my mother said was, don't go near the river. Now I'm 62 years old. What's a young boy do? They go to the river, right? Well, we played in the Kiddie Car ruins, and it was ruins back then. And it's dangerous. If you walk down there, it's not the best place. My mother was right, don't go near the river. There's no roof on the place, and I thought it just became more dilapidated. And as I come back 28 years later, there's literally trees growing out of it. To see what they're going to do to try and restore the Kiddie Car factory and move it and make it part of the public access. The public access to me has always been, even when we looked at this site, the most important piece. It really is the connectivity of all the trails. You'll be able to walk across 2 bridges, walk through this new amazing development, through the environmentally sensitive area. And if the GRCA didn't close their doors and have a fence, this is a private citizen, Pearle Hospitality, who's saying, come use our land. Come, we're going to donate 24% of our entire project back for public access. They can then walk across the bridge, through the arena, back down across the David Street Bridge, down through Victoria Park, and that's an amazing trail. And can you picture what that's going to do? So public access is number one. Number two, we didn't have hydro generation. Since then, Al Marquito, in partnership with these guys, with Aaron and his team, have built a hydro generation. I mean, if you go to Niagara Falls, you can't, as a kid, you can't get anywhere near. They've opened it up to the public to say, this is how you generate hydro, and here's what it generated historically to fuel energy for all the factories on both sides. Number three, we certainly wouldn't have the links that this has. You know, the municipality and the McDonald Trust and the Victoria Street Bridge, and now the other walking bridge tied into the Pearle Hospitality, gives that linkage between the two areas. And I don't know if you saw it, but on the piece where you come across the McDonald Bridge, and it's right there where Victoria Street continues, that whole idea of a public square and engagement by our residents and tourists alike is going to be an incredible. I think it will become our town square long-term. Number four, I think it's important that we encourage people to live downtown, to re-energize it. And that whole live, work, and play, I think what they've done with the mill so far is the play part, but I personally want to live there. When I told Aaron that, I said, I want to live there. This is the town I grew up in. This is the one I'm passionate about. I want to live in one of those condos. So I'm happy to say that I'm waiting for this to be built, and I encourage you to approve it because I want to live there long term. It brings me to the investment portion of this. And people are easy to say, oh, people make lots of money and profit's a dirty word. Well, it's not. I estimate the Southside alone is over $200 million in investments. Think about that, $200 million just on the Southside. Forget about what they've done already with the mill, which is incredible work. And every project that I've ever done, I always say labor is about half of it. So you got $200 million. That says $100 million is going to go to labor, $100 million in materials and $100 million in labor. Well, $100 million in labor, divide that by the number of jobs that's going to be created during the 2-year construction process, or longer, 2 or 3 year to phase this in. That's jobs that our local people can have. That doesn't even include the jobs that are going to be created by the new commercial space and by the long-term development of this. So I'm on the Economic Development Committee, and we've always talked about how do we create jobs and not become a bedroom community. This project is a great one to develop jobs. The heritage preservation, when I looked at this, I thought 15 years ago when we had the offer and I was before council in 2004, I thought the Walser Brush building was hardly worth saving. I thought it was going to fall into the river. And I certainly didn't think the Kiddie Car factory was able to be restored. To think that Pearle is willing to do that, plus the buildings they've already done, even if they have to move the Kiddie Car factory, I think is pretty incredible to the heritage restoration of our buildings. So I'd like to thank Aaron. Thanks for investing in our community. Thanks for creating jobs. I think they've earned the right over the 8 years that they've done. I think they've earned the right because they've committed to our community in a big, big way. And I think they've earned the right because of the quality of what they have done already. I think we're starting to see the spin-off in tourism, and I think we're just at the beginning. I think the Southside is really going to put Elora on the map. And I've said from the day I met Aaron, this project isn't a decade. This is a 100-year project that we're going to look back. Somebody's going to look back 20 years from now, 50 years from now and say, who were the councillors and who were the staff that took the lead to develop this project in partnership? And I hope it's this council. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bob. So now we're going to go into some reports. So we've been talking about the project overall, but there's several different items that we have to kind of go into a little bit more detail. So I'll have the first item there, 5.1, is about the heritage impact assessment. And so we have a report by Mariana. So I'll invite Mariana to come, and then we'll make sure that we provide opportunities for councillor questions and comments on each section. Mariana?
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Linton, members of council. So I'll just go through a bit of the background in terms of process that we went through and considerations that were made. So the property is 6523 Wellington Road 7. We're all familiar with it. It is a subject of a holding zone, as mentioned. So Brian has done a good job of describing the planning that's in place on the property and how we got there. The property that we're talking about is the most westerly end of the lands, known as Elora South, and is a continuation of the Elora Mill redevelopment, which was completed on the north side last summer. The holding zone was placed on the property when it was rezoned after an extensive secondary plan process, which resulted in official plan amendment and detailed zoning regulations at the time. The effect was to recognize and protect the heritage features and value of the site, which was identified as a former industrial cultural heritage landscape, while allowing extensive mixed-use commercial residential development of the entire south side. The holding zone ensures that certain conditions are met prior to redevelopment of the site. One condition was submission of a heritage impact assessment and conservation plan that addresses the specific heritage resources on the site and their long-term conservation. And the other was a site plan approval to address site-specific issues such as grading and drainage, building placement and design, pedestrian and vehicular circulation, and landscaping, among other matters. The holding zone was partially removed in November of 2017 from Phase 1, easterly portion, and that was to allow the redevelopment of the former Little Folks Admin building, which is currently serving today as the wedding chapel and office space. So at that time, similarly to this, heritage impact assessment, conservation plan, and site plan were submitted and approved. So last year, in mid-2018, a site plan application was submitted to begin fulfilling the conditions of holding zone removal for this next phase of the site, which we're discussing today, and that was the condominium development. As you know, the site contained the Potter Foundry, so this needed to be reviewed in detail. The proposed hotel and other commercial uses would be the final phases, as mentioned. The HIA, or Heritage Impact Assessment, was prepared by Robinson Heritage Consulting and submitted in December of 2018 and considered by the Heritage Committee and staff in January. So the township retained peer review consultants for heritage and for architecture at the time, and it was deemed that further information was required to conduct a proper review. So as all of the comments that were received were provided to the applicant, this resulted in a revised HIA and architectural plans that were submitted in July. They addressed most of the comments and concerns raised. These were provided and considered to Heritage Centre Wellington at the August meeting. At the meeting, the project consultants were present there to answer on both sides, so the township's consultants and the project consultants. They were also, the plans are also appended to the staff report, so you can see what the most recent plans are. After much discussion, the committee endorsed the HIA, which includes relocation of the Potter Foundry ruin, which is a significant heritage resource, and it would be relocated within the site approximately 75 meters to the southwest, where it will continue to be accessible to the public through the trail system in much the same configuration. Though retention in situ is always the preferred form of conservation for a heritage resource, other options, such as relocation in this case, can be considered where it is warranted and where it will still retain the heritage values of the resource. Though the site's not designated, acceptance of the HIA is key to clearing the condition for H removal. Recommendations in the HIA will be followed, including preparation of a conservation plan prior to issuance of any building permits for disassembly of the Potter Foundry and reassembly. This will be ensured through the site plan agreement and securities that would be required upon approval of the site plan, which is currently in the final stages of approval. In addition, a recommendation has been made to designate the Potter Foundry once it's relocated to ensure its long-term conservation, and this will also be pursued. Public comments received to date have been mixed. some welcoming the highly anticipated redevelopment of a derelict former industrial site in the middle of downtown Elora, which has stood vacant for many years, while others have expressed concerns about the protection of heritage resources and the impacts of scale of the redevelopment on the village character. Heritage conservation and redevelopment may seem at odds, however, they can be achieved in harmony through if the proper tools are in place. And just briefly about the provincial policy statement, which guides planning and development. It is meant to be considered in its entirety, including policies around intensification, housing, and economic development, redevelopment of derelict sites, conservation of heritage resources and landscapes, and conservation of the natural environment. Staff have reviewed all the plans in light of all of the policies and attempted to balance all these considerations while working within the existing official plan and zoning regulations. The Heritage Committee has also made great effort to consider all aspects of the heritage conservation issues at hand within the context of generally accepted heritage practices and principles. While the redevelopment of the site is being phased due to its scale, the net benefits and losses should be viewed as a whole. There are 3 identified significant heritage resources on site: the former Little Folks Admin Building, the former Walser Building ruin, and the Potter Foundry ruin. The first 2 are being retained and restored in situ, with the admin building already completed, and the Potter Foundry is proposed to be relocated so it can be protected in the long term, while the public can continue to view it and have access to it. The most important value of a heritage resource is the story it tells of the history of the development of a place and culture. So relocation of the Potter Foundry with the proper conservation plan and commemoration strategy can still successfully achieve this aim. This has been successfully completed in other places such as Guelph. After considerable review, staff and the Heritage Committee are recommending endorsement of the HIA as it fulfills the general requirements of an HIA, which was confirmed by the township's heritage consultant. The HIA and peer review were influential in making alterations to the development so that it is more compatible within the existing cultural heritage landscape, and which staff and the Heritage Committee can support. Final design details for the Potter Foundry will be approved by the Heritage Committee through the Conservation Plan, and final details for the condo building will also be assured through the Site Plan Control Bylaw and review process. Staff recommend that Council approve the recommendations made in the staff report. And I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mariana. And I just wanted to thank the Heritage Center in Wellington at this point for working so hard and for doing a lot of extra meetings to work with our staff and with Pearle Hospitality on this project. And I commend Pearle Hospitality for working with them and providing all the necessary information that they need to review this. So appreciate that. Turning it over to Council, any questions related to the Heritage Impact Assessment? Councilor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering about the GRCA and the natural resource permit for this item. It has the permit as a, if you look on the document, as a minor development, and I'm just wondering why it's where's the permission for the major development if we're okaying the condo? I'm just wondering where that information is.
So just to clarify how we're going to do this. So ask questions, go through staff. We have a number of experts here in the group. So if you want to get information back from anybody that's in the room here, feel free, staff, feel free to do that. Okay.
Through you, Mayor Linton, to Councillor Kittredge. The GRCA has criteria set out in their application process. Usually a minor application would not involve an official plan amendment or a rezoning, and would be of sufficient scale that they would deem it to be major. In this case, the area that's being affected is relatively small, and there are no planning amendments being required because it's going to be used as passive recreational, which is okay in an open space or environmentally sensitive zone. So that was a determination made by GRCA that it was in fact minor.
Councilor Kittredge, follow on?
So will there be, like, when we decide this, we'll be really deciding for the whole condo development. Is that not the case? Like, we're at the heritage aspect of the whole condo
You
development.
are, but the Potter Foundry relocation is outside of the condo area. It is in public domain, essentially. It's in our open space area. It's not within the condo. One of the objectives was to make sure that building didn't fall under the purview of the condominium corporation. So it will be held by us as private landowners.
Councilor Kittredge?
With the, I was glad that you had shown the earlier renditions of the development, and you had it as part of a kind of a streetscape, and it was going to be, so how would that have been detrimental to this to the public if they could access it that way? Like, because they're walking towards the condos, the original. But now that you've redone the whole project and the public, it's changed the whole project. So how is it that it would be not regulated? Because it would be designated as soon as you did this development.
Our concern with the in situ restoration or disposition of that building was that the concept shown had the new building totally enveloping the Potter Foundry. So it would be contained essentially within that new building. It would be taken out of public domain. The public would not have access to it. And I don't think that's the intent. The intent was to make sure that the public continued to have access to it, which they will in this new scenario.
Councilor Kittredge?
Part of the assessment for the cultural landscape is the views that you see. So really, when you come in to the town, you immediately see that Potter building. It's iconic from all the bridges, from everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand the rationale for removing that cultural asset, which is recognized as that, and putting it so that you'll never see it from the main part of the town, which is what you, when you come into the town, you see it. So I understand you restoring the Foundry and the Walser, and those are the two other assets, but now this one is hidden to the back. So I'm just wondering, what was the actual rationale, other than you're saying grading, like in terms of cultural view impact? People won't see it, like they won't see it from the main part of the town at all. And so I'm just wondering why it wouldn't be moved with the other assets that are there, and then it would be immediately apparent to people coming into town, oh, they did save it, and it's close to all the other assets. So I'm just wondering, how
Yeah.
did you decide, because this whole development is only talking about the condo development, but there is a whole other part that's going to be developed. And it would seem to make sense from a heritage point of view to keep, if that landscape is part of the view, to pull that asset back into the whole development. So I just don't understand the rationale to sort of put it back into actually an environmental area. It doesn't, so I don't understand what was the actual rationale for deciding that as opposed to bringing it forward.
Well, there's where we get caught in good heritage practices. You may recall that one of the criteria was that it be kept as close to the original location as possible. Now, we perhaps could have moved it to the far east end of the site where we have the Walser building and the Little Folks Admin building, but that wouldn't satisfy that particular goal of heritage preservation by keeping it close to where it is. The visual on the building will be from Wellington 7. As you may recall, I mentioned we'll be removing trees to expose that building face and keep that low so that you can see it from Wellington 7. I think that's important, but also important for people using the trail system to come upon it. There's this element of surprise when you're approaching it through the forest, that all of a sudden you're coming upon this ruin. That was also part of the goal.
Thank you. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. I was going to say that heritage, we did speak quite a bit about this as well. And some of it was that, that element of surprise, that element of discovery to come upon something that I think all of us as kids, if we walk those trails, to suddenly step in the forest and go,
Right.
what is this, right? And I think a lot of us who have lived here share that feeling of suddenly coming upon that building through the trees. The idea of having it accessible on the trail system again is very important. And the amount of detail they're putting into moving this, I believe they're numbering the cornerstones, and they're going to ensure that it's going to stay very similar. There was a lot of discussion as to exactly what's going to happen with this building and what's the most important piece. If even the change of the condo unit, how it runs down the river face, to have it stepped back so it doesn't have a solid wall across the entire river face. And then, so you can see how the plan is developed for the whole purpose of it, balancing, do we keep the building there, or do we want to make sure things are placed in the right spot? So I think the sense of discovery, the sense of being able to, everyone feeling that they can see the river properly, walking the trails, there's lots of conversation happened at Heritage as well.
Anything else from council on this one? Councillor Kitchers?
I was wondering why there isn't like a 3D imaging of what this development will be. Because when they're like on flat paper, like they've been photoshopped and everything, and you don't get an understanding of the volume and the scale of what's happening. And I'm wondering, like, in terms of, you're removing the heritage icon that, you know, the Potter building, but then you don't get an understanding of how this, because this is part of, you're talking about a heritage landscape, and so you don't get a sense of what the scale is. I went to the site, and I went to where the bridge would be, the pedestrian bridge, the glass one, you know, because it's, it's open to the public there. And I was looking at it, and I'm glad that in the drawings that you just presented today, but it's not evident in the report we got, that it's going to be higher, but there's also a whole volume scale. And I was wondering, this is a whole new development than from the public presentation previously. And I'm wondering, what's the impact of this scale on the neighboring properties, like that are heritage properties? Like, what's the shadowing? So I'm just wondering, like, what, that sort of seems like information that we would need to decide what we're doing here today, like how we're doing that. And I'm just wondering about how, if we could get that kind of information, like from this, because I do visual art, and so I do 3D things. I don't do flat things, but you can take pictures of three-dimensional things, and they look just different than when it's in reality. So I'm just, in terms of the scale of it, it seems, standing on that place where the bridge was going to go across and seeing that, it seems large. It seems higher than the rest of the town. It seems like that will be then the focus of the visual landscape. Does that make sense? So I'm just wondering, how do we get a sense of the size of it all, like in terms of, in perspective to what the mill is and the rest of the small little houses beside. There is some scale drawings, but it doesn't say, I didn't see the distance and what the shadowing would be and all that stuff. So I'm just wondering, like, since there hasn't been a public meeting about the new development, about the new pictures. It's been online, but it hasn't, you can't see it scaled, and it's just a little bit, I think that information would be helpful. Is it possible to get that information?
I believe so, because it already exists. That's the reason we did those color renderings, because they actually do illustrate the massing and the relationship with the mill. 3D, we're in the process of creating an actual model, which will give you that same effect. But the drawings that have been done, especially the renderings, should give you a pretty good idea about the scale. In terms of the shadowing, that's an interesting point. We did do a shadow study, which, did Bill Hicks present that to you, Councillor Llewellyn, at the,
Yes, yes, he did.
yeah, so at the Heritage meeting, there was a shadow study produced for the condominium that showed the impacts on adjacent properties. That's readily available if you want to see that. But I think at this point, we would have to rely on those color renderings to answer your question about scale and massing.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Sorry, I was, on page 49 of the Robinson report, it does speak towards the scale of the building beside a two-story house. There's a few little things in here that speak towards how it looks. It gives a little address, descriptions prior to as well. So, I don't know, then that's, I know it's confusing in here, but in 49 of his report, I think that's 56 of our report. But you can hopefully see a little bit where they've tried to give a bit of scaling and height for reference.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. Is it possible to put up those renderings that we saw earlier? I think it would help with the discussion that's going back and forth,
Sure.
is just to see some of that.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, and I think that there's something for us to remember that, just so that we take this somewhat in piece by piece, but this is a heritage impact assessment aspect on this building. And the development itself is not in a heritage, other than this building, it's not a heritage site where you need to meet certain regulations. Quote me if I'm, or correct me if I'm wrong, Mariana, but I think that's where we have to focus on. This is other than this building being moved, this is what we're talking about today. Though we don't get too far into the conversation about what is it going to look like, how does this work, because that is really a development aspect further down. If we can keep that focus on that.
Councillor Kitchers?
In response to Councillor Van Leeuwen, almost all the pictures are about the condo development, so like it is part of the discussion, and that's what we're kind of talking about. And let's take this picture here. It almost looks like it's the same height as the mill, but I don't see any information here about the actual, like, elevations, like comparable. Like, is it the same height as the mill?
I believe it's slightly taller than the mill, because the land on the south side is higher elevation than the land on the north side.
When I looked at the Potter ruins where they stood, and I compared them from where that site was, it's actually higher than, the Potter ruins are higher than the spa, and they're only about 10 feet, I would estimate about 10 feet lower than the mill. And that's only 2.5 stories. So now I'm just, because these are Photoshop on a flat surface, it doesn't give you the right perspective on seeing how this will impact your visual sight. You need to have it see the volume and the scale. That's just how 3D is different than 2D. And you can give impressions of 3D through shadowing and color and texture, but the thing is that I don't know, like this, I don't even know where this is taken from, but it's whether it's a helicopter or what.
It's actually taken, the perspective is used, we used a drone above the
Okay,
river
okay.
to photograph.
So it's just, but in terms of the scale of seeing, because what we are talking about is the heritage landscape, which is what we're talking about here. And this building is part of that. Moving the Potter and then replacing it and having this is part of this discussion. That's what I think we're talking about here. And so
Okay,
I just need to see how the whole, how it looks from the landscape when you're looking from the town. That's sort of what.
Councilor Kitchus, I think you made your point. You'd like to see 3D images. I think that on page 62, you get a pretty good visual of what this looks like. I mean, they've gone kind of above and beyond what they have to provide for us here. So let's kind of get beyond this. Any other comments from council? Councilor Dunsmore.
So I just want to clarify, before we move on to the question, the reason you need to take down the building is because if you left it there when you're creating the parking, it's going to fall down and get damaged?
It would have to be removed for, it's quite extensive removal of rock we
Right.
need to
Right.
accomplish there.
And so the idea here is to save that building so that it doesn't get damaged falling down and then we lose it altogether.
Anything else from council on this? Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Kelly. I wanted to just, Brian, would you just point out the river access points again for the benefit of the public? One of the good things here is river access and trail access. Could you just point them out on the photographs for
See
the
which
benefit
one
of?
would be best for that. Probably. So the existing trails that go through that environmentally sensitive area are not going to be changed in terms of their alignment. We will be improving some safety aspects of the trails, but you'll notice that a lot of people want to get down to the area they call the cove to access the river, and that will be maintained. Part of our stewardship of the environmentally sensitive land, too, will include taking care of any hazard trees in those areas so people can pass safely, exposed routes so people don't trip, that kind of improvement within the forested area. But you can see that the Desire Line, that one major trail that gets right down to the gate where GRCA is preempting people from entering at this point, is well used. In fact, all the trails in that system are well used. And one really important part of the trail system is the fact that we now can bring them to the back end of that building, of the relocated Potter Foundry, and bring them through. That was more a stroke of luck than anything. We just ended up with a preferred location that was adjacent to a trail, which is a tremendous benefit. So access to the river through anywhere in the ESA is going to remain exactly as it is today.
And I think more information is coming in the next section. Andy's going to talk about the easements and where their public can go. Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linden. So just from my understanding, when we talk about the parkland dedication section, that's going to be discussed a little later, or? Okay, so I'll hold my question until then.
Okay, I'm going to call to question this component, and I'll read a pretty long recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Washington receive for information planning report PLN 2019-49 dated August 22nd, 2019 concerning the fulfillment of certain heritage conditions related to holding zone removal on lands located at property municipally known as 6523 Wellington Road 7, Elora, in the Township of Center Wellington, and that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington endorse the Potter Foundry and the Elora South Condominiums Heritage Impact Assessment prepared by Robinson Heritage Consulting, and dated July 2019, including the dismantling and relocation of the Potter Foundry as outlined in the report, and that the required conservation plan for the Potter Foundry be prepared and submitted to Heritage Center Wellington for approval as a condition of the final site plan approval for the lands at 6523 Wellington Road 7 and prior to the issuance of any building permit for the site, and that the commemorative strategy be prepared and approved by Heritage Center Wellington immediately after the relocation of the Potter Foundry, together with a recommendation to designate the Potter Foundry under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Move for that recommendation, Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Moving on to the easements on the Elora south side, and we have our CAL going to be talking about public access and trails and that kind of thing. Andy.
Thank you, Mayor Linton, members of council. So as Brian had mentioned through his discussions, and as we've always worked along with Pearle, the importance of the public access along the property on the south side of the river. So we have been working away all the way through this project, and the map that you see on the screen today outlines the easements that we are looking to protect. We already do have some easements that were protected through the purchase and land sale that we did do through with Pearle several years ago. And so there are a number that are already currently protected in some of these easement areas. But what we're looking at doing is protecting public access and the infrastructure. So the gold color is mostly the infrastructure that is current, as well as having to protect in the future. The blue, which is the end on the upper right-hand side, is the Victoria Street right-of-way. And so that is currently protected for easements, but we're enhancing that to include pedestrian and cycling because we'll be at the end of the bridge, and we want to ensure that. The yellow line that you see is kind of the future trail connection that will come off of the development just west of the Walser building, accessing down to the trail and then underneath the future Pearle Bridge. The lighter blue trail access is what we've been talking about this morning, with coming down through the hydro corridor and then back up through to County Road 7. And then the green, and it's a little difficult to show all of this all in one context just because of the magnitude of the property. So that is the ESA lands that go all the way along the river corridor. And we are looking, as Brian mentioned previously, to protecting that through a public easement across all the trail system that's already in. Recognizing that we do not, as part of the ESA requirements, we do want trails throughout that whole entire ESA area. It is to be protected, but this does follow the line of the existing ESA trail. You will notice in this area we have currently, as we just talked about, the Cove area, left that off as an easement currently. Just for the fact that we do know we have the Kayak Club and a couple other clubs that want to have access to that. So we want to have some future discussions with them about the access. It is a very, for all of you that have gone down there, a very steep slope. So we're very concerned about the safety of getting people up and down. And for tourists coming to the community, I've seen people where they've walked down and realized they're not going to be able to get back up because of the steepness. So it's something Pearle and ourselves are going to be working with local organizations to see what we can do there to provide public access and ensuring that some of the groups have offered that they will also secure it with having their own provincial association insurance companies protecting their members in case there's any injuries down the road. So as I mentioned, from right to left, we're looking at pedestrian and cycling over at the Victoria Street pedestrian area. The yellows and blues and greens will only be for pedestrians. We don't want to have that interference with cyclists and pedestrians through those corridors. And then the ESA lands, strictly pedestrians, but if they're carrying a kayak or boating, trying to get a rubber tubes getting down to the river, that will be allowable. So we don't have the conflict as we go along in those areas. As Brian also mentioned, that we do have, so from the parkland dedication, this meets and far exceeds the standard parkland dedication. The advantage for the municipality is that we will not be having to own those properties. These will be owned and operated, owned by the Pearle and being developed to far higher standards than what we will ever be able to do as the township. So they're making that investment, but we will be securing those through the easements. Nikki Melchers from SV Law is here, and she's been working with their legal firm, the Pearle's legal firm, to ensure that we have all this documentation ready to go. All we need to do is create the registered plan, and then these will be registered on easements on the property. So if any time in the future the land is sold or whatever, those will be protected on title on those properties, that the township will have those easements for now and into the future. The last component, now completing these easements, as when we did do the land purchase and sale between Pearle and the township several years ago, there was a condition about making sure these easements are in place, as well as time factors. And as a magnitude of this project, we've seen this project extend a little beyond what we anticipated back at the beginning. I think Aaron and all of us were a little bit more optimistic of how quickly we could get some of this development going. It's very complicated, so those timeframes have moved along a little further. So that is causing some complications from Pearle's end in order to gain finance to secure moving forward with some of the Southside property. So we believe we're prepared to release those conditions of those properties returning back to us if they were not being developed by Pearle. Pearle is now moving on the south side, strong commitment to completing the work on the north side, and protecting these easements gives the township the security that we will be able to have the public access to the south side that we had started with at the original components of that. So I'd be happy to answer questions, and Nikki's here to help if there's any more legal terms that we need to deal with.
Okay, just to be completely clear, no matter what color is on the map right now, every citizen of Center Wellington has access to those trails.
So the gold is only for infrastructure.
Okay,
Yep.
but except for that big band of gold, those are trailers that everybody in Center Wellington has access to
Correct.
legally.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. CEO Goldie, can you describe, looking at the map, what is the actual parkland area that Pearle is referring to, asking us to acknowledge as their dedication to the town?
Right, so it's actually all of the easement areas as well as the ESA area, because they will be allowing that for public access. They're just keeping it in their ownership to be able to protect it and maintain it, that the township doesn't have to take on that liability and responsibility.
Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. My question would be for Brett. Brett, when we talk about I believe it's 5% parkland allocation, do easements under the legislation meet the standard for allocation? Are easements sufficient, or generally it would be municipally owned property?
Well, parkland dedication provisions under the Planning Act are a little bit more complicated than just a straight 5% in this case, but we have the authority to ask for 5% of the land, or a maximum of. For residential development, it's 5%. For commercial, industrial development, it's only 2%. So that, if you looked at the big picture here, you'd have to take that into account. Typically, it is either a land dedication or cash in lieu of. So a cash payment. In the case of this property, other than what Pearle has already committed to retain, there isn't any other land that township staff would recommend that the township needed to own to take as a dedication. Everything that we would wish to have public access to through this development is being preserved as such. So we didn't envision a dedication of land. By our official plan policies, we would also deduct the area of the land that is the ESA and the other environmentally protected land that they can't build on anyways, our official plan. We deduct that from the total area. So there's really a question here of whether or not a cash payment was in order. And so the request that Pearle is making is that the dedication of easements to maintain the right of public access in perpetuity, and their obligation therefore to maintain those easements rather than the township maintaining a trail, Pearle is going to do it, would be the equivalent to a a cash payment or a dedication being made. So typically it would be land or a cash payment. What Pearle are asking for and what Andy is recommending in his report is that we accept the dedication of the easements as their dedication, like fulfilling their obligation to dedicate. So that's why we brought it to council.
Councilor Foster?
Thanks, Mayor. So in broad strokes, Brad, this meets or even far exceeds the spirit and intent of parkland dedication under the Planning Act.
Staff, we think so, because we're getting public access to the trail, not having the burden there, but then not having the burden of being required to maintain those, to pay the cost of maintaining it. And also, you know, it's land that is environmentally sensitive, so it requires kind of eyes on it all the time, and by being the owner, Pearle will achieve that, whereas we don't have the resources.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. CAO Goldie, I noticed in one of the renderings that showed people walking along the edge of the river right beside the McDonald pedestrian bridge, and I seem to recall other renderings that showed people walking, I think, on the east side of the McDonald Street Bridge. Are there plans at some future date to try and have more sort of public walkways down along the edge of the river in those sections?
Yes, so as my report states, as Pearle develops further out on their site plan, we will be looking at what other public access we will be looking at. As Brian showed in one of them, there's a big public plaza that they're planning on the south side across from the bridge. They may be an additional amount of land that we need to be looking at for public access, as well as along from sort of Victoria Street pedestrian bridge over to Metcalfe Street. So those are things that as Aaron and Pearle develop those, we'll be able to secure those. At this stage, we know, and Pearle's committed to saying they know that they can protect these lands through their development application to this point. It should also be noted at the easterly end of the property where the Metcalfe Street bridge is, the township already owns a significant corner to that. The Wellington Street right-of-way, or Wellington County right-of-way for Metcalfe is fairly wide. So that whole triangle corner, if you go from the sidewalk back, it's about 3 or 4 parking stalls further back in the right-of-way that is still already township property. So the intent is to be able to connecting that up to that street. At this time, we just don't know how far that development and what that development's going to look like.
Councilor Kitchus?
I just would like to ask Brett, just for clarification. The ESA, is that the parkland that is dedicated with the right-of-way easements? Are they both the parkland dedication, or is only the easements the parkland dedication?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so the ESA is not part of the parkland dedication, as Brett mentioned. Typically in a development, we would take all those lands and subtract them out from the land dedication requirement. So if it was 20 acres and the overall property was 50, we would say it's only 30 acres that they have to deal the cash in lieu with, because we don't accept ESA lands. So Pearle will remain the owner of all the ESA lands, and as Brett mentioned, we'll be maintaining those. The access agreement is for the trail land only through the parkland, through the ESA land.
Councilor Dunsmore?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Andy, have we had discussions, or has Pearle Hospitality had discussions with the Grand River Conservation Authority about extending that trail system to get right into their park system?
Yes, actually, we just had a meeting with the new CAO and Councillor McRae a couple weeks ago, and not only the land that the GRCA property owns at the end of the ESA, but also accessing property and trails through the Conservation Authority lands.
Follow on, Councilor Dunsmore?
So if I'm reading that right, then, from the new bridge right through probably as far as you want to go down through the GRCA property, the public will now have access along the riverway.
Yeah, and I think the other additional enhancement to this is the Blue Trail, which is the access down to the hydro corridor, is an additional trail access that we've never had to that system as well.
Councilor Kitchus?
The square footage is, how is parkland like decided? like you have the square footage of it, like the footprint, but if you have a multi-level structure, does that count for more parkland? So how is that?
Yeah, sorry, no, it doesn't. It's, the parkland dedication is based on the land area. And so there is, if we were getting into really, really high density developments, there's a provision in the Planning Act for us to have an alternative standard that could apply, that is, unless you get really dense, it's the same. It always comes back to 5% of the land, and the province is in the process of reviewing that anyway, so. But again, it's, 2% on commercial, industrial, 5% on residential was the maximum amount of land you can take. And of course, we are in the middle of the province possibly reviewing it as part of this community benefit area thing that they're talking about. So in the future, our ability to take land will be constrained even further. But here, what we're just asking for is consideration of the easements to be considered the equivalent of land.
Councillor Bentloon?
Thank you. And I'm actually quite content with this because what I see really different about any other subdivision or any development that we would see is generally the parkland is for play structures, much different use than what we see is going to happen on this property. And I think that staff is, along with Pearle, are working together to say, why are people coming down here? The real intent is to walk, to discover, to connect across. And if I can be frank, I'm not coming down here with my 5 kids to play on a park. We're gonna walk and discover, and we'll play somewhere else. So I think that this is a really good solution to not trying to carve out a green space for a jungle gym. One of my questions quickly would be, because it's owned by Pearle, what are the regulations, for example, winter cleanup? And obviously they're going to want this, I think trying to remember that this is to their benefit as well. But do we have regulations, or are there regulations because it's public access? So.
Right, so one of the things that our next steps will be looking is an operation agreement with Pearle regarding that for the future of the trail. We do see we may do some sharing of those resources in that sense with regards to maybe our crews could be doing that maintenance on behalf of Pearle and things of that nature, so that's the next steps. Brian and I and Aaron have chatted about, there are similar agreements in other municipalities. One of them is the new development down in the city of Guelph, where the cities and the private sector have developed a river trail, very similar to this. And so those are examples we're going to be looking at.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. CEO Goldie, in terms of where the blue line ends at County Road 7, are there not sort of some future planned for that area where there may be thoughts of a crosswalk or something? Or?
Yeah, currently, so on this drawing right across the road is the maintenance building for Pearle, going through site plan application now, and we're doing some road improvements, working with the county. And so at this stage, there are going to be probably in the next month, I think it's the next month, we'll be doing some construction on that road to provide the services. So we are doing underground utilities to provide for future pedestrian crossing if required. Just adding to that, there's also a very clear, for those who haven't walked it, at the end of the SA Trail, going under GRCA Trail, there's a very easy, accessible, not underneath the bridge, to access the trails on the westerly side as well, which is probably a safer environment.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approves the release of Condition 5, rights to reconveyance within the purchase and sale agreement dated June 2017 between Elora South Inc. and Elora North Inc., Pearle Hospitality, and the Township of Center Wellington. And the Council approve the pedestrian public easements and pedestrian cycling public easements on the south lands to satisfy Pearle Hospitality's parkland dedication for the proposed condominium development. I have a mover for that, Councillor McCray, second by Councillor Foster. All in favor? And that is carried. 5.3, site plan control bylaw and holding zone removal. And we have a report from Brett Salmon.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So the other requirements of the holding zone removal, in addition to the heritage impact study, and is passage of a site plan control bylaw. So we put that in the secondary plan because at the time, the county had just adopted an amendment to its official plan that give it additional authority under site plan control to review, or for municipalities to review or comment on matters of the exterior design. Prior to that, the authority wasn't there, so a lot of the public sometimes thinks that we have authority to say, well, your brick should be this color or that color, but we really don't under typical site plan approval. So as site plan control, in order to do so, you had to have, first of all, appropriate policies in your official plan, and then secondly, put it into your site plan control bylaw. So the county having that policy framework in place, when we adopted the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw for this, we said that we would put such a bylaw regulation in place. So I've prepared a bylaw, and it includes the principles, as I think Brian mentioned in his summary. Yeah, those are the things that between the architectural review, the heritage review, are the agreed upon design principles that Pearle is adhering to in their building design. So those design principles attached to the bylaw are set out in Schedule A. Those are the things that they are already integrated into the exterior design. But having this bylaw will kind of enshrine it, that we can, when we're reviewing building permits, make sure that they stick to it. So that bylaw, a similar bylaw was done for the admin building when it came forward to have its H removed. Now, of course, that building stayed the same. So these design principles, we didn't need to integrate into the bylaw because the building just stayed the way it was, more or less. So that's one aspect of it. And if council passes that bylaw, then in our opinion, it will be appropriate to remove the holding zone, because council, having endorsed the HIA and passed the site plan control bylaw, then they've fulfilled the requirements of the holding zone that we put in the zoning bylaw in 2013. So it would be appropriate to remove it. And that's why we've got that bylaw. That's sort of the order that we did things for this meeting today. Endorse the HIA, then the site plan control, then the holding zone removal is ready to go. The holding zone removal is only being removed for a part of the property. You can see from the map that it'll remain in place on other buildings, although Pearle would like to review whether it's necessary. There seems to be some agreement through the HIA that some of the other buildings that the Walser building, the Potter Foundry, once it's relocated, will get designated. So the trigger for a heritage impact assessment, for instance, will be through a heritage permit process if they're designated. And then we may not need to enshrine it in a holding zone removal bylaw. But that's a matter for another day.
Anything for council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Southern Wellington give 3 readings to a site plan control bylaw applying to land described as Part 1 of the reference plan 61R-11042, and that the Council of the Township of Southern Wellington give 3 readings to a bylaw to remove the holding zones symbol from land described as Part 1 of reference plan 61R-11042. Can I move it for that? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. And moving on to 6, thanks Brett. Moving on to 6, the bylaws. I have a recommendation that bylaws 2019-43 and 2019-44 be read a first, second, and third time, passed and signed by the mayor and clerk, and the corporate seal affixed. Move for that. Yep, the comment, yep.
Should we pass 43 before we do 44, just to make, because they have to be done sequentially?
We can. It's a bylaw, so, but
Yeah, we would just, yeah, we'll just change the numbers.
Sure. I'll redo the first one then. That bylaw 2019-43 be read a first, second, and third time and passed and signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal affixed. To move for that. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that's carried. And then the second one is that bylaw 2019-44 be read a first, second, and third time and passed and signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal affixed. Mover, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that's carried. Confirmatory bylaw, that bylaw 2019-45 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held August 22nd, 2019 be introduced a first, second, third time and passed in open council. Moved by Councillor Van Leeuwen, second by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittra, second by Councillor McElwain. All in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you very much. Exciting day.